When I was around 12 years old, we were living near a large park in Oklahoma City. And at the time, I had begun coin collecting, as a lot of kids do, just trying to figure out new things. So I had a large penny collection, and I had started on nickels, and I had found every minted penny from about 1901 until the current time. At that time, it was about 1980. And I had each of the different mints, and I had some kind of peculiar ones. The collection wasn't really worth anything, but it was a lot of fun. We would buy rolls of pennies, and I would search and search and search, or I would get pennies from people who'd had them in their homes, and I was always looking for different things, whether it be the Philadelphia Mint, the San Francisco Mint, the Denver Mint. It was lots of fun. And one day when I was in the park, I found a coin, and it was a 1788 half penny, and it was about this big, and it was copper, and I thought I had found the coolest thing ever. It looked old. It had a patina on it. It had, all the markings. I got a book out. I thought I found something that was worth $10,000. I mean, I thought, as a 12-year-old, I thought I was scot-free for the rest of my life. We took it to a coin collector, and I took a couple other coins, and I was marveling at all the different things he had, and he took one look at it, didn't even get it up to anything, and he says, "Nah, this is just a replica. Somebody had an event, and they just made one to make you think there's nothing to this, it's real." And he showed me a bunch of stuff about it, and I still have that coin, by the way, just on the off chance the guy was pulling my leg. But I have something today that I thought I would share with you because it's kind of interesting. In today's gospel, we have Jesus talking about a coin. In the story, it starts off with the Sadducees and the Pharisees coming to entrap Jesus. So the point of what they're trying to do is they're setting him up and trying to get him to say something blasphemous. So to say something blasphemous would mean that they would be able to put him in prison or even to have him put to death. And so they are seeking something to entrap him. And so the question is, who should you pay taxes to? And one thing, that's a really clever question because it's double-edged, right? Because if he says, "I'm not going to pay taxes to Caesar," then what happens? But Caesar's group is mad at him. And if he says, "No, you should pay taxes," then there's a whole other issue because he becomes unclean because he's touching money that has another god on it, and you're not supposed to have any other gods before Yahweh. And so there's all kinds of interesting. But I have something that I think you might find interesting. And I'm going to make a better picture of this so you can actually see it. And probably the text and everything is going to look backwards to you, so I'll try to take a better picture. This is a coin, actually, that has an insignia on it. It has Tiberium Pontius Praefectus Judea, which is Pontius Pilate. This was a coin that was minted and would have been used by the Romans at the time of Jesus. One of our members gave this to me a number of years ago. And it's really interesting to look at it. You can see the head of a figure, and you can also see some other insignias. And maybe we don't think about this, but I'm sure all of you have change laying around the house. All of our money have pictures of presidents on it. But it doesn't really mean the same thing that it would have meant in Roman time. Because Caesar and the Romans believed that Caesar was a god. And so to have the image of Caesar, to have the image of Pontius Pilate, or to have the image of of a Roman, was to show their power, but also to show the image of the one who ruled their universe, so to speak. Caesar was said to have been born of a virgin. He was said, to be immortal. He was said to be all these things. And so that image is really something. So think about that for a minute and then understand the depth of what is happening in this story. So Jesus is trapped, right? If he says, "Don't pay taxes," then what happens? Well, as I said earlier, the Romans get him. If he says, "Pay taxes," then that means he's touched a coin that has an image of another god on it other than Yahweh, and then he's blasphemed against the scriptures. He becomes ritually unclean, and for a rabbi to do that, then it's trouble. So what is Jesus' answer? I think it's brilliant. He says, "Well, take out the coin." Which one? He sort of entraps them because they've got the coins, right? So that's one thing. They've been profaned now. He says, whose image on it? And they say, well, Caesar's. And they said, well, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. Give to Caesar what is Caesar, and give to God what is God's. The brilliance of the answer is that nothing is really Caesar's, and everything is God's. And so really they have nothing to give to Caesar. What this is about is idolatry. Idolatry is when we place an item, a thing, a person, whatever it might be in our life, ahead of ourselves, ahead of God, ahead of creation, and we idolize it and make it something more than us. I don't think any of us would want to ever admit this, but most of us have idols in our life. We have things that might determine more things that happen in our life than we want to say. They might have tremendous power in our lives. They may carry symbols, or they might be things that draw us in different directions. Part of the question that I think Jesus is getting at in this gospel, and what we'll find in scriptures that follow this, is where is your heart? What guides your heart? What guides your mind? What guides your soul? I think when we take a deep look at what's happening in our lives, or how we organize ourselves, or what we do, or the different things that we spend our time doing, that becomes a really critical question. And I think it's also a challenge. You see, the Sadducees and Pharisees, in their attempts to trap Jesus, were trying hard to make it so that he couldn't continue teaching. And they were so caught up in their rules and so caught up in what they were doing that they were leading people away from God. And in much the same way, the Romans, who were about power and conquering and subjugating everybody around them, were also leading people astray from God. But if we get personal in our own lives, there's so many things that can draw us from the love of God and the love of neighbor. So let's remember something that is an initial teaching from the scriptures. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul. And then Jesus in the New Testament adds to that, and love your neighbor as yourself. These are the primary commandments that we are to understand as disciples of Christ. The first has to do with how we orient our entire being, and that is loving God with all our mind, with all our soul, with all our heart. And the second piece, which is often even more challenging, is loving our neighbor as ourself. The question we have to ask in this gospel is, what gets in our way of doing that very thing? What stands before us and prevents us from loving God and loving neighbor with our entire being? It could be small things, and it could be a lot more of the big things that are really challenging. I want you to think and pray hard in the coming weeks. We all know, if you look at social media, if you look at the news, the rhetoric is getting more and more intense. I think we're getting more and more afraid of each other. I think as we continue to deal with all the ramifications of the virus, we're getting impatient and losing our cool. We have to ask ourselves about who we are and what's written on our heart and on our mind and on our soul. I can tell you countless stories about living a principled life, about people who faced difficulties or challenges and held to certain principles throughout those without fail. And in many ways, that's what Jesus is getting at in the gospel, and why his answer is so brilliant. he didn't fall for the trap. He didn't fall into the arms of the Romans. He didn't fall, actually he did. He didn't fall for the trap. He didn't get set up at that moment. But instead, he reminds us that in his clarity of thought and clarity of spirit, he saw through what was happening. In much the same way, I think all of us are called to live in our principles of being a disciple, to live into loving God with all our heart and mind and soul, and also loving our neighbor as ourselves. And when we do that, the world is different. But there are many coins around us. There are many things that might draw us away from the love of God and the love of neighbor. And we have to be careful and vigilant. I want to challenge you to think hard about the idols in your life.